Jake Hatch of Locked On BYU Cougars is here because I did a double take. I texted you actually to make sure that this wasn't AI.
Yeah.
Aaron Roderick, BYU's offensive coordinator, steps to the mic after a practice up in Provo and says he's reluctant to say anything nice about young players for fear that they will be tampered with. Mm-hmm. Was this tongue-in-cheek or is he serious?
I think there are equal parts of him being a little bit facetious with it, Spencer, but he's also acknowledging the reality of what's going on in college football. Now, I've seen it on social media, some of the reaction. Well, does he not know there's not a spring transfer portal window? No, he's aware that there's no transfer portal window. He knows that. I think he's just being wary of putting anybody seemingly on anybody else's radar and potentially saying, hey, this guy's really, really good. Well, other programs, their antenna is going to go up and say, hey, let's keep an eye on that kid. And if he develops, maybe we try and steal him off BYU's roster.
Do you think that's a concern he's projecting for the future to the next transfer portal window? Or is he potentially thinking about something I have brought up on this show recently, which is the idea, and I've heard this get suggested by more than a couple people, I'm sure you have as well, that there could be players during or after spring ball that are going to just unenroll and re-enroll in another school and essentially create an unlimited constant transfer portal window.
Well, he watched that happen with Jake Retzlaff just this past year. Remember, Jake was facing a multi-game suspension with regards to his civil lawsuit that involved sexual assault. He decided, you know what? I'm not going to live by that. He unenrolled at BYU, enrolls at Tulane, and ultimately leads the Green Wave to a college football playoff berth. Now, I think it's a bit of a special circumstance there, but he has seen it play out in real time with his own players. I would imagine he's thinking more down the line towards the next transfer portal window, actually, Spencer, but you can never be too certain because, yes, Dellinger's mentioned this from Yahoo Sports, like the fear of a player or players out there deciding, you know what, try stopping me in terms of unenrolling wherever I'm at currently and enrolling somewhere else and obviously cashing in on that. There is a legit fear with that. I would imagine that you have to monitor all of it because let's be real, the college football universe, it is an absolute roller coaster right now, and you can never be sure of what's going to happen next.
No, and that's why there will be a vote on the potential to bring about penalties, whether they get upheld in the courts or not.
Sure.
You know, the NCAA and Division I Council, they've got to at least try, right, to enforce some amount of penalty for a school that's going to go about this, because everybody got rid, or at least the folks that make these decisions, they got rid of the spring transfer portal window for a reason. They didn't like it. I think Tennessee with Nico Iamaleava was probably one of the flagship examples of, man, I don't want that to happen at my program. When spring practice, a year ago at this time, it's crazy to think about, but a year ago at this time, Jake, everybody assumed that Nico Iamaleava, off of a playoff appearance as a starting quarterback for the Tennessee Volunteers, was going to be their starter in 2025. And then he wasn't. And I understand coaches that don't want to go through spring ball and then have the ability for their players to just decide, okay, I'm going elsewhere. And so that's why they got rid of the spring portal window. But that's also why the penalties, I think, have to be considered and should be passed. Really, you might need an antitrust exemption to make these rules enforceable for the NCAA, which, as I discussed recently, might be the best of bad options. But it might be the most logical path to go down, because you just cannot expect coaches and teammates to deal with this all the time, right?
Well, yeah, and you would like to think that they would, at some point in the not too distant future, they wouldn't have to worry about this all the time. But until, as you mentioned, something comes about that is going to have a punitive measure attached to it to stop people from potentially doing this, it's always going to be a constant threat. And yeah, that's why I believe it was partially tongue-in-cheek, facetious from Aaron Roderick to say, hey, I don't want to comment on younger players, but I think it's also just acknowledging the reality of what it is. You and I both know that I work for a radio station in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we are the broadcast home of the Utah State Aggies. Spencer, this time last year, we have the play-by-play voice of the Utah State Aggies on our staff. He, speaking of the guy who, literally broadcasts the games, was barred from attending spring practices by Bronco Mendenhall for fear of anything leaking out. That, I know that seems like almost like overkill, but that is the reality these coaches are existing in right now. I know it's at the G6 level, but it's existing at every level, BYU at the Power 4 level, and even beyond that. You mentioned Tennessee and Nico Iamaleava. All of this is all mixed together, and until you mention there's something to really stop it from happening, it's going to continue to be a constant threat.
It's not just Bronco Mendenhall, by the way. I think the amount of practice access in Eugene for Oregon now compared to what it used to be is severely less. And I think it's good strategy if you're a coach. I think it's unfortunate because the folks that are wanting to go and cover practice and write about players, they're trying to do their jobs. They're trying to be that connection point between fans and the team and give them an idea of who looks good, who's standing out. But I don't think that it's going to go in the other direction. I think it'll keep going down this path that we're talking about, where coaches are saying, yeah, we don't want anybody in. We don't want to see anything. And I don't think that is a good thing for college football fans, because it leads to them feeling more disconnected from the team than they otherwise would be.
Well, and that's what this sport has been built on, is that connection between the fans and their team. You cut back access, you don't allow the reporters or whoever else to tell the stories of these players. Well, yeah, that connection, it doesn't develop. And with this day and age of the transfer portal and guys essentially being on one-year deals, Spencer, the connection between fan and program has never been more at risk. And that's ultimately going to affect, I think, the bottom line for programs. No matter how much they may make in media rights deals, we're talking about kind of that intrinsic value of the connection between your fan base and your program. That is very much at risk of being lost.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think there are some particularly older fans that already have kind of checked out. Now, the television viewership numbers suggest that we're overstating this, but I think that what that's also a result of is, in the age of mass media, the sport is becoming more popular and you're pulling in more casual fans. But for the long-term diehards that just want to know about their team and players, and they want to have guys and trust that they're going to be a part of the program. I saw something recently that each conference on the college basketball front, all the Power 4 leagues have, I think, less than 15 players that were 4 or 5 year retained players on the roster from the time they began their college careers. Like less than 15 per team. And in college football, we're going down that same sort of path. I mean, thousands of kids get into the portal every single year.
And that's what BYU, I know Kalani Sitake is trying to counter that. He's made no bones about the fact that he said, if you're going to come to BYU simply for a paycheck, Spencer, he says, I don't want you here. I want you here for more than just a paycheck. Because as he said, if you're just in it for the money, you're not in it for the right reasons. And that's nice of him to say that. Obviously, I think the proof is in the pudding. He's done a really good job at retaining the talent at BYU, but how long does that really last? And that is the concern I have for BYU, but that extends to literally every other program in college football, is that, yeah, you can say all the nice things, you can do your absolute best to keep guys around, but they've got a lot of people around them telling them a lot of different things, and it really depends on their internal motivation as to what they're ultimately going to do.
Well, maybe Aaron Roderick was just having some fun, and we're overblowing this entire thing. That's what we hope, but I don't know. Tampering's a pretty easy thing to do.
I'm telling you, I think it's equal parts him just having some fun, but I also think there's a legit concern, and it carries over not just to BYU, for every program across the country.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but hey, that's college football. We still love it despite all of its flaws. Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU, great as always.